Hi friends! I have been reading chapters of my book to select individuals for feedback and just input on what they think about how the book is progressing so far. And so I thought that I would just go ahead and read the first few chapters of book 1 in the series. The series is Jack and the Magic Hat Maker, and I've got at least 6 books outlined for this series. This is my debut novel. This is a young adult fantasy fiction novel series. Book 1 in the series is called The Golden Telescope. And so I thought that I would just go ahead and read the first handful of chapters to give you a taste of what the book is going to be like. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and get started, and I hope that you enjoy this book, at least these first few chapters. And bear with me, I'm not a professional reader, but I've been practicing reading this story to friends and family, so hopefully I've got the reading thing down a little bit better now. So without further ado, Prologue, Portland, Oregon, 2007. The butler materialized into the nursery on a hot and muggy summer night. Standing invisible and undetected in the far corner of the room, he discovered 3 young children sleeping soundly, each one in their own little bed. His mission needed to be accomplished with speed and stealth. None of the home's 5 inhabitants could know of his presence. Keeping the spell-crafted hat on his head, he reached across his chest into the gray-brown suit jacket he wore and retrieved a small manila packet he had placed there earlier that evening. Opening the flap, he withdrew a small pair of black-handled barber's shears and 3 white envelopes, each with a name on the front, written in his master's elegant script: Ethan, Jack, and Sadie. A soft breeze made the wispy curtains at the window billow gently as he tiptoed to the bed closest to him. Bending over the toddler, he gingerly snipped one single sandy-colored lock from her cherubic head and placed it into the envelope marked Sadie. Lifting the parcel to his lips, he involuntarily winced at the mildly offensive taste of peppermint-flavored glue before sealing it closed and returning it to where it came from. 1 down, 2 to go, he thought, as he walked carefully past the foot of Sadie's bed and onto the second one. The first boy was sprawled out across his bed, covers thrown aside, half of them lying in a pile on the floor. He wore pale blue pajamas with bright red cars and yellow numbers printed all over them. Stepping cautiously over the blanket, Arthur moved to the head of the bed and was just leaning in, scissors in hand, when the child began to stir. Arthur jumped back, losing his balance, and nearly knocked the lamp from the bedside table before righting himself. That was a close one, he thought, and he watched as Jack rolled over, fitfully clutching after the fluffy white teddy bear sitting next to his head. Arthur waited a moment until the boy was settled before approaching once again. Bending cautiously over the lad, Arthur delicately clipped a fringe of chocolate brown hair from the nape of Jack's neck, placing it into its envelope, then sealed it closed and added it to the packet alongside Sadie's. He then made his way to the last, slightly larger bed, located directly beneath the open window. The boy lying there was the oldest of the 3 children. Arthur found him face down, with his arms wrapped tightly around his pillow. The pitch-black curls on top of his head were loose and abundant, but cropped short around his ears. The stranger held his breath as he reached out and anxiously grasped a stray section, deftly cutting it from the boy's head. Returning to an upright position, he exhaled a silent sigh of relief, grateful to have completed the task without incident. He moved stealthily to the other side of the room before placing the last lock of hair into the envelope marked Ethan. Inserting the third and final envelope into the larger packet, he closed it, then tucked it neatly inside his suit coat. Looking around one last time and feeling confident he needed nothing more, Arthur reached up, located the small button situated on the underside of his hat brim, and firmly pressed it, instantly vanishing from the room. Chapter 1. Jack. Portland, Oregon, 2017. The memory was fuzzy, like looking at a photo through grease-smudged reading glasses. There was something there, just beyond his grasp, that he couldn't quite bring into focus. Faces he strained to remember. They came to him most often in his dreams, a presence and a warmth that would wash over and fill him with a sense of comfort and belonging unfamiliar to him in his waking life. Fleeting images of love and laughter and family, and then, just as quickly as they appeared, they were gone. It was overwhelming. These memories didn't happen every night. They were sporadic, and he wasn't quite sure what triggered them. But sometimes, like this night, he'd awaken with a jolt, hyperventilating, heart pounding, his dark hair soaked with perspiration, and bedclothes clinging to every inch of his scrawny, preteen body. It could take several minutes just to get his breathing back under control. And more recently, a new sensation had amplified the experience. His hands tingled. No, burned. Intensely. Not in the same way your arm might feel if you've been resting your head on it in one position for too long. No, this was different. Normally, the feeling would fade as he came to a fully awakened state, and he'd almost forget about it as the day wore on, until the experience repeated itself. But he knew, without a doubt, that whatever prompted these episodes most assuredly must also be the source of his chronic asthma attacks. Jack sat up now, gasping for air, and turned on the nightlight located on the small makeshift table next to his bed. Scrambling for the inhaler he always kept close at hand, he shoved it into his mouth and depressed the nozzle, inhaling long and deep. He breathed in a sufficient dose of the medicine, and it had the desired effect. Exhaling a sigh of relief, he put it back in its place and reached for a sip from the water bottle sitting next to him. It had been 9 years since his parents died in that damn accident, and he knew that no matter how much time passed, he would never get over the loss. Reaching again to the table, he pressed the button on his smartphone to check the time and discovered it was only 3:10 a.m. Too freaking early to get up, he thought, but I'm awake now. Grabbing the phone, he threw back the dingy white sheet and thin plaid blanket covering his bed, then swung his feet out and onto the cold concrete floor. Turning on the phone, he tapped the icon for the calculator displayed prominently on the start screen and began working out a particularly difficult formula he'd been thinking about. Bling! Jack was startled out of his mathematical delirium. Who would be texting me at this hour of the morning? He wondered, as he swiped down the glass to see who had the nerve to disturb him at such an ungodly time of day. Bart. What in the world is Bart doing up at? He shifted his gaze to look at the time in the upper right corner of the phone. What? It's already 6:30? Rubbing his eyes and shoving his fingers through his bangs to get them out of the way, he began reading the text. Meet me at Pop's a few minutes before school. There's something I want to show you. What's so exciting that we have to meet before school? Jack texted back, then watched for Bart's response, which came almost immediately. "Just trust me, you're going to want to see this." Aunt Lizzie isn't going to approve, Jack thought. Oh well, permission forgiveness. I'll just leave a note and deal with the consequences later. Same day, 7:30 a.m., downtown Portland, Oregon. "Old Town Chinatown, Northwest 2nd and Davis," the pre-recorded woman's voice announced over the intercom system. Jack stuffed his phone into the side pocket of his thigh-length navy pea coat, grabbed his backpack, and stood up, gripping tightly onto the handrail as the Max car slowed with a screech and a jerk to a stop. When the doors slid open, he dashed out of the train, sprinted to the corner, and looking both ways, ran across the street. He could already see his friend, a block further down the road, waving enthusiastically in his direction. A little taller and about 20 pounds chunkier than Jack, Bart was, he thought to himself, a bit of a dork. But that was one of the things he liked best about him. Standing there, shifting back and forth from one foot to the other, Bart was dressed in typical Portlander gear. Red Converse tennis shoes, white cotton ankle socks, crunchy-looking khaki cargo shorts that came down to his calves, and a striped t-shirt. And of course, he also had on a forest green ball cap with a bright yellow O, pegging him as a Ducks fan. Shaggy bits of sandy-colored hair were escaping from under the hat and almost completely covered his eyes. As Jack came closer, he could see two thin white cords dangling from Bart's ears and disappearing into his right front pants pocket. "Hey, what took you so long?" Bart shouted as he moved to meet him at the corner. "I've been here for 10 minutes already," and he motioned for Jack to follow. "There was some holdup at the square," Jack said, readjusting the strap from the backpack slung over his left shoulder as they walked. "It probably would have been faster if I'd just gotten off the train and headed over on foot. Speaking of feet," he bent over to retie a lace that had come loose on his two-tone leather wingtips, then stood back up before continuing. "But I'm here now. What's so exciting that we have to meet before school?" Bart was already standing in front of the familiar destination. Flanagan's hobby shop was owned by his dad, Bill Flanagan, and it was their favorite hangout. The two boys spent most days after class helping in Bart's family store. In exchange, Pop would pay them a small weekly allowance for their assistance. This was a good deal for Bill, since the boys spent most of that money buying some cool new item in the store. Grabbing hold of the key on the ring at the end of the purple plastic spiral band he always wore around his wrist, Bart inserted it into the lock on the old sage green and glass door and opened. "Just you wait, Jack. This is going to blow your mind," Bart said as he walked in and flipped the light switch on the wall just inside. Flooding the long, narrow space, the light revealed floor-to-ceiling shelves lining the walls on either side of the shop, each one filled to overflowing with magical-looking merchandise of all shapes and sizes. Art kits, race car, hot rod, and airplane models to assemble, tiny square glass bottles of brightly colored paints in every shade of the rainbow, glues and tools and books and wooden boxes filled with X-Acto knives. Jack loved being here. This special little shop made him feel he had been transported to another place in time, a place that stimulated his imagination and the cares of the world withered away, leaving him only with dreams of possibility. Bart confidently made his way to the back of the store, where a thick burgundy drape hung from the top of the doorframe down to the floor. Jack glanced at the Employees Only sign posted on the wall to the right of the opening before following him through and into a part of the shop very few people were permitted to see. Walking past large workbenches in the center of both sides of the room and more shelves crammed to the gills with all kinds of supplies. They passed a dark, open staircase leading down to Jack didn't really know where, before Bart came to a stop in front of an old mahogany door. He turned to look at Jack with a twinkle in his eye. "You know Pop keeps his private office locked, but he told me it's okay if I take you in to show you this thing he discovered last night." He spun back around and inserted the same key into the lock and turned the knob. There were no windows in this part of the building, so it was pitch black inside, the only illumination coming from the outer office, as Bart walked to the far side of the room. There, he fumbled for the switch on a green glass and brass lamp sitting on top of an old roll-top desk. Turning it on, he motioned for Jack to join him. "Close the door behind you, just in case," he said, and Jack complied before walking to stand next to his friend. "Dude, what's with all the mystery?" Jack asked. "You make it seem like your dad has some kind of a national treasure hidden back here or something." And he laughed nervously. "Well, that's not such a stretch," Bart said, as he lifted the lid on the wooden desk to reveal the inner surface, drawers, and cubby holes of the thing. There, sitting in plain view, was a shiny golden telescope. Jack could see that there were lots of unusual symbols engraved all over the exterior of it, and wondered what, if anything, they could mean. Picking the treasure up carefully and holding it nimbly in both hands, Bart turned to face Jack. "My dad thinks this," he started a little too dramatically for Jack's taste, "might have belonged to Joseph Buncle Kelly," his eyes widening for emphasis. Jack stared back at him with a blank, inquisitive look on his face. "And who is that precisely?" he asked, lifting his chin slightly to the right. Bart appeared shocked. "What? You've never heard of the kidnapping king of Portland? I can't believe my ears," he said, setting the glass back down on the desk momentarily. "You know this shop sits right on top of the old Shanghai tunnels, right?" He didn't wait for Jack to respond, but hurried on. "Well, Bunko Kelly is only the most famous kidnapper of them all. He supposedly smuggled over 2,000 men out of this place. His guys drugged unsuspecting sailors, then hustled them out through the secret underground passageways and onto ships waiting in the harbor. Crazy, huh?" He finished and turned to once again pick up the telescope. Looking at Jack, he held it out in his direction. "You want to check it out?" "Wow, and your dad really thinks this thing might be his?" Jack asked, reaching to take hold of it. He placed his right hand on the telescope and boom! Instantly, a burning sensation shot like a lightning bolt up his arm, filling his head with a blaze of light that electrified his brain and blinded him to his current environment. Suddenly, in his mind's eye, he was looking out across a massive expanse of midnight blue water, salt air filling his nostrils, his feet steady but unfamiliar as the slippery surface on which he stood rocked violently back and forth with the movement of the waves. Looking down to his hands, he could see the telescope grasped in both of them, but to his surprise, those weren't his hands he was gazing at. They were much larger than his own, and older, with hair on the knuckles, and a gold ring with a big black stone was displayed prominently on the ring finger of the right hand. Jack dropped the telescope at once and immediately found himself back in Bill's office, standing next to Bart, who was frantically shaking his right arm. Jack, what the hell?" Chapter 2. Edward. Dublin, Ireland, 2009. McPaden Manor sat at the end of a long, winding driveway on the top of a rocky hill overlooking the Irish Sea. It was more than a house, much more. Made of dark, gray, bumpy stone, There were 15 bedrooms and almost as many bathrooms in the place. It was large and imposing, but, Arthur thought as he descended the wide carpeted staircase, it possessed a rustic warmth uncommon for mansions of its size. Having lived here more than half his 54 years, this small castle had become his home. Entering the library, he found his dear old friend and master, Sir Edward, seated in a large brocade wing-back chair, facing the roaring fire Arthur had set for him several hours earlier, his slippered feet stretched out in front of him to absorb the warmth. "Sir Edward," he said, "I thought you might like a brandy to chase away the chill before you retire for the evening." He carried a decanter of honey-colored liquid with him on a silver platter. A single snifter sat next to it at the ready. Arthur sat the tray down on the round walnut table next to the chair. Gazing up at him over wire-rimmed reading glasses, Sir Edward glanced over to the tray his butler brought to him, a twinkle lighting his penetrating hazel eyes. "Why, yes, Artie, that would be lovely," Edward responded in a weary old voice. That Master McPaden was in his golden years was self-evident. His full head of hair, which was once raven black, was now heavily streaked with gray, and there was a deep sense of sadness in his overall demeanor, an indication of the immense pain and loss he had already experienced in the past. But his chiseled jaw, prominent nose, and the way he squared his shoulders still offered a glimpse of the powerful man he had once been. Ding dong! The deeply resonant tone of the front bell announced that someone was at the door. Arthur made his way from the library to the imposing mahogany and iron front entrance of the mansion and opened it. He was shocked to see the two of them standing there before him after all this time. Inez and Clara McPaden had aged considerably in the 16 years since he last saw their faces, but there was no mistaking the stark, if intimidating beauty of the pair. "Arthur!" the girls chimed in a sing-song sort of way that said they were less than genuinely happy to see him. "It's been too long!" And they moved uncomfortably under his scrutinizing gaze before pushing past him and on into the main foyer of the house. "Where is he?" Clara asked, glancing to the left toward the library. "Is he in there?" Inez shoved him out of the way and headed in that direction. "Sir Edward is not expecting you," Arthur said, asserting his dutiful authority. "I will announce you," and he attempted to sidestep them. "Nonsense," Inez proclaimed. "He will be thrilled to see us." And they both strode confidently past him and on into the room. "Daddy!" they shrieked in discordant, high-pitched voices. Sir Edward looked up, and the surprise on his face was glaringly apparent. "Girls," he said, slowly putting his brandy down and taking a moment for their presence to register before cautiously standing to greet them. "This is a surprise." His words were measured with skepticism. Edward took a few steps in their direction, then stopped in front of his daughters, expectant. Inez had been 24 and Clara only 19 years of age when they stormed out in an angry rage 16 long years ago, vowing never to return. He could see that the two women standing before him now were once the same little girls he had raised and loved, but much older, to be sure, and time hadn't been particularly kind to them either. There was a hardness in their faces he didn't recognize, and an energy about them that made him feel uneasy. But perhaps they decided they had punished him long enough and were now ready to mend bridges and put the past behind them. He opened his arms wide in a gesture of embrace. "Welcome home," he said, and they eagerly lunged forward, wrapping their arms around him, patting him gingerly on the back, and giggling a bit too much before stepping away. Arthur remained by the door, observing the encounter, when Edward caught his eye. "I tried to announce them, sir," he flatly stated, clearly unimpressed with the saccharine sweet display of affection. "But they insisted." "It's fine, Arthur," Edward said, and relaxing a bit, he motioned for the women to join him before the fireplace. "Sit with me. We have so much catching up to do," he said, settling back into his favorite chair. "Arthur, bring us some refreshments," he said, sending his manservant away. "Now, where shall we begin, girls? I want to hear all about what you've been up to." "Well, speaking of that, Daddy dear," Inez took the lead. "Clara and I have been talking about how unreasonable we've been all these years, refusing to talk to you. And we just feel so bad about blaming you and abandoning you the way we did." Clara was nodding her head enthusiastically in agreement with what her sister was saying. "That's right, Daddy. We just feel awful," she said, sticking her bottom lip out and making a pouty little look with her face. "And we have come here today to ask your forgiveness and to beg you to take us back into the family again." Inez appeared repentant, and her eyes were tearing up just a little bit. "We really should have come last year, after hearing about what happened to Ross. We know you must have been devastated." Inez looked at Clara. "We certainly were," she finished, and they both bowed their heads. "After what happened to Ross?" Edward asked. "How do you know about that?" Ross had been out of the country and out of touch for years. He sat forward, curiosity clearly showing in his expression. "Oh, Daddy, he was our little brother. Long ago we hired a private investigator because we wanted to reconnect with him, try to rebuild our relationship. Just because we were mad at you wasn't any reason for us to lose touch with our baby brother." And Edward thought Inez seemed sincere. "But he was a smart kid and did a really good job of covering his tracks, as I'm sure you know," Clara interjected. "So it took a very long time before we were able to find him," she went on. "Years, in fact." Inez made it clear that she concurred. "And it's so tragic that we were finally able to locate him just weeks before the accident." Edward pulled a white cotton kerchief from his left-hand breast pocket and blotted the corners of both eyes. "Our family has suffered far too much tragedy over the years, girls," Edward started. "First, the loss of your sweet mother, which caused so much pain and division between us, and then Ross's death." Tears were running down both cheeks, and he removed his glasses to wipe them away. "I'm grateful, though," he continued, "that at least his death has finally prompted you to come here today, so that we are able to make amends and move forward together." He finished as Arthur re-entered the room, carrying a pitcher of iced tea and a silver tray filled with a variety of meats, cheeses, and crackers. Setting it down on the coffee table in front of them, he looked inquisitively at Edward, then to the two women, and back again. "Sir, will you be needing anything else?" he asked intently. "Thank you, no, Artie. We are doing fine. More than fine, actually," Edward said, and then he added, "The girls and I have so much to talk about. You may leave us for the evening." Inez jumped in, smiling brightly. "Oh, yes. We can see ourselves out when we are ready to go, Arthur. No need to worry about us." "Don't be ridiculous, Inez," Edward interjected. "The two of you will spend the night here. It's already so late in the day, and I won't hear of you staying elsewhere." Then turning again to Arthur, he added, "Please see to it that rooms are prepared for my daughters before you retire." "Certainly, sir," Arthur replied uneasily, "if you'll be needing nothing else." And he turned and left the room. Looking back at the two women before him, Edward continued. "Now, where were we?" he asked, a little smile crossing his lips. Oh, Daddy, Clara began, we were just getting ready to say, well, Inez and I have been thinking that with Ross gone and all, maybe you'd like to involve us in the family business if you get my meaning. She was shifting nervously in her seat, looking back and forth from her father to Inez and back again. Yes, Daddy. Clara and I have gotten over our feelings of anger and resentment where your abilities are concerned, and would like nothing more than to have you teach us. Help us develop our powers so that we can assist you. Maybe together we could even have a better chance of finding Mama, she concluded, anxiously anticipating her father's response. Well now, girls, it means so much to me that you have had a change of heart. It really does. He looked at each of them with sincerity as he spoke, wanting to make sure he didn't offend or injure their fragile new relationship in any way. But you know that my particular gift is handed down to one recipient in the bloodline, and in this case, that person was Ross. So it would be impossible for either of you to continue my work. Then, observing the clear disappointment on their faces, he quickly added, but I can assist you in other ways to develop your own gifts. I'd be very pleased to do that. And he watched uneasily to see how they would respond. But Daddy, Inez began, we want to learn how to make the hats. And he noticed that her tone had changed to a more insistent one than she used before. Looking at Clara with a different, more focused expression on her face, she seemed to be urging her sister to persuade him further. Daddy, is there no way to get around that little rule? Clara was pleading now. It would mean so much to us if you could figure out a way. She stood and began pacing next to her chair. Inez started tapping her fingernails on the glass she held in her hands. These changes in behavior did not escape Edward's observation, and he adjusted his position in his seat, sitting up a little taller, a certain realization coming over him. No, ladies, I cannot get around that little rule, as you say. I have no control over the forces that dictate what powers and abilities are bestowed upon which individuals. He noticed they were both becoming increasingly agitated. You didn't come here to make amends today, did you? He asked, not expecting an answer. What is it you truly want from me? Fine then, Father. If you insist on being difficult, have it your way, Inez whispered under her breath, each word dripping like battery acid from her carnelian-colored lips. I knew you would refuse us access anyhow. You have always made it abundantly clear who your favorite child was. She looked to her sister then,